We'll throw the big switch that happens, which means you'll be able to see me on YouTube. Tim Shipman will be here to pause the action live from the House of Commons as Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak face off for the first time in 2023. We'll do that at 12 o'clock. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with Teach in Further Education. All the latest national and international breaking news and informative interviews, plus unrivaled journalistic expertise and detailed analysis from the most knowledgeable minds in the media. Times Radio Drive with John Pienaar, Monday to Thursday afternoons from 5 on Times Radio with Teach in Further Education. Share your skills and inspire the next generation in your industry. Head to gov.uk/Teach in Further Education to find out more.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
A very good morning to you. Nice to have you with us. Matt Chorley on Times Radio on Wednesday, January the 11th. We've got PMQs Unpacked. I think we're on the YouTubes. Let's get on. I think we are live. We are live on the YouTubes. I suppose I could give you a wave. Give you a wave. Can you see me? I think we are. We are. Yes, we are. You can see me. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I better sit up straight and look a bit smarter. Yeah, so PMQs Unpacked is coming up at 12 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, Kate Borsay will be here, as she was just in her pleather shirt. And then at 3 o'clock, Jane and Fee are going to be joined by... No, that's tomorrow's show. No, today they've got Michaela Strachan on. And then obviously John Pienaar will be here with Times Radio Drive from 5. Now, one of the stories which has broken in the last hour is that Andrew Bridgen, the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, has been suspended by the Conservative Party, said the whip withdrawn by the Chief Whip Simon Hart, after he tweeted comparing the rollout of the COVID vaccine to the Holocaust. It follows his suspension yesterday from the House of Commons for 5 days after breaking lobbying rules. A suspension that was then extended after he issued a veiled threat to the head of the watchdog investigating him. Well, we can now speak to the Conservative MP for Brigg & Gall, Andrew Percy, who's the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group Against Anti-Semitism. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very good. Nice to have you with us this morning. What did you think when you first saw the tweet from Andrew Bridgen claiming that an unnamed medical person had told him the rollout of the vaccine was the worst? What was it? The biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. What did you make of that when you saw it?
Well, I think like most normal people, I was absolutely outraged. I mean, to see that tweet and then to think it's acceptable to retweet it, I just think is, completely and utterly incredible. I mean, the Holocaust was the state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jews and others. To compare that to the vaccine rollout is frankly sick. It's disgusting. But, this is one of the problems we've seen throughout the anti-vaccine movement, is this constant comparison between the Holocaust and the anti-vaxxer movement. Even, if you remember when they were marching against this, they were wearing yellow stars. So, I mean, sadly, it's not unexpected amongst the anti-vaxxer movement, but for an MP to retweet that, I think is just completely and utterly disgraceful.
I mean, he's been on quite a journey, Andrew Bridgen. On the 2nd of April 2021, he posted pictures of himself having his vaccine, saying the staff are very helpful. Can I encourage everyone to take up their vaccine appointment to protect themselves and those they love? Together we can beat COVID. What's gone on with him in the last few weeks? This is probably one of the most egregious examples, but he's used a debate in the House of Commons to raise completely unfounded claims about the safety of the COVID vaccination. Story from the Times over the new year in which he claimed that it was the Secret Services had known about COVID before for months before it went public, and then used it to control people's lives. What's gone on with him?
Well, I don't even want to begin to think about what goes on in Andrew Bridgen's head. I'm not strong enough for that. But this is sadly. I mean, I think all MPs will attest that we've all seen an uptick in conspiracy-fueled nonsense since the pandemic. I think that the pandemic, with people's online behaviours, enabled people or drew people into certain, online sites and various other social media, these anti-vaxxer social media sites, and people got drawn into that. And we've seen this increase in conspiracy-fueled nonsense. I mean, it is just complete and utter rubbish. I mean, the overwhelming weight of scientific and medical opinion and evidence is very clear on all of this. But there's a mentality of people who are susceptible to these quite dangerous and insidious conspiracy theories, of which the anti-vaxxer movement is a major part. So I mean, look, what Andrew Bridgen has said on this is utter rubbish. It's total nonsense. Anybody with half a brain cell who understands any basic understanding of science and of how these processes operate know that it's nonsense. So I don't know how he's ended up in this position, but it's dangerous, and no member of my party should be pushing this crap.
It was clearly the chief whip is taking action today because of him likening it to the Holocaust. But do you think your colleague should have taken action sooner, given that he's been pushing this for weeks, if not months now? Clearly, the use of the Holocaust is incredibly incendiary, but the facts that the lies that he's pushing, he's been doing for months. Shouldn't the government have taken action, or the Conservative Party taken action against him sooner?
Well, I spoke to I contacted number 10 and spoke to the chief whip this morning as soon as I became aware of this, and I have to say Simon Hart has acted very, very quickly. I think that the problem you have in sanctioning members of Parliament is you leave yourself open to the charge of being contrary to free speech. But all I can say is that there have been conversations over the last couple of weeks since it became very obvious that this particular MP was pushing this absolute nonsense, in which members have raised concerns about how long somebody doing this can be tolerated. Now, MPs have a right, the parliamentary privilege, you can stand up and say anything in the chamber and have a right to free speech. And it's very difficult, I think, sometimes for the whips to know where that line is on the free speech stuff. But, for me, it's when it becomes dangerous, it's when it becomes gratuitously offensive. And, with Andrew Bridgen's tweet today, he not only promoted dangerous nonsense, he also promoted it in a deeply, deeply offensive way. And that's why that Rubicon was very clearly breached. But, there is a broader issue here about, how we manage the more, the nuttier things he has been saying about the vaccine programme. And I'll be, continuing to pursue that with the chief. But, I think they've acted quickly today. So I'm full of, I criticise my party when they fail on things, but I think on this they've acted very quickly, so I'm very pleased.
Just briefly, maybe in a word, Andrew, can he stand to be a Conservative MP at the next election?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think anybody who believes this kind of crap should, but that's a matter for the whips, not for me.
Andrew Percy, really appreciate your time today. It's Andrew Percy there.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. In a moment, we'll bring you PMQs Unpacked live. First, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The Health Secretary says nationwide contingency plans have not been put in place by the unions, whose members are striking from the ambulance service today. Steve Barclay says it will be a challenging day. The GMB union says that lives are at risk every day because of staff shortages, not just on strike days. Trade unions have told MPs they'll continue strike action for as long as it takes to get a fair pay deal. Mick Whelan, the boss of ASLEF, told the Transport Committee the chance of a resolution was zero, adding we're further away than when we started. As we've just been discussing, Andrew Bridgen has had the Conservative whip removed for saying COVID vaccines are causing serious harms and was the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. Conservative Chief Whip Simon Hart said that Bridgen had crossed a line. He's already been suspended from Parliament for 5 days after he was found to have breached lobbying rules. And all flights across the US have been grounded due to a glitch with the Federal Aviation Administration's computer system. In a statement to NBC, the FAA said operations against the National Airspace System are affected. We'll have more on that, of course. We'll have a full news update at 12:30. But now, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, it's PMQs Unpacked. You can listen along on Times Radio. You can watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel, as hundreds of you are already. Just go on YouTube and search Times Radio, so you can see, but not just my big fat face, but also the.
My big fat face.
Well, I realised I'd sort of walked into that slightly. Tim Shipman, Sunday Times chief political commentator. How are you? Happy New Year.
I'm still fat, Matt. Yes, no, good. Yes, very good. Happy New Year, and Happy New Year to all of our listeners.
All of our listeners.
Wherever
joining
they may
in.
be.
They are in Sweden. They are in Pennsylvania. They are in Taunton. And they're posting comments Manchester, and they're posting comments about Andrew Bridgen. Do you think Andrew Bridgen will come up at PMQs?
I think it's possible that he does. I mean, it's so off the charts that it's an open goal for Starmer if he wants to take it. It's one of those things that maybe he won't make a question of, but he sort of might refer to in passing or use as one of his punchlines. But there's quite a lot else going on as well.
What would be, if you were, I think you are occasionally a betting man, what would you bet on coming up at PMQs today?
Well, it's
Keir
slightly perilous terrain always for Starmer, but it's hard to see him looking past the NHS and strikes and the government's failure still to resolve all that. He did quite a lot of that before Christmas, and it's still rumbling on. There's various talk of the money going up for the train people, and there have been more conversations with the health unions than there were before Christmas, but it's still going on, and it's meat and drink for Labour to weigh in on the NHS. So I'd be surprised if that doesn't come up at some point. But they've had all Christmas to think about something clever, so it's not out of the question that Labour will come up with something a little bit left field and try and throw Sunak.
This attack that we've seen on the front of the Mail today, Labour opposes life-saving law to curb strikes. Labour was accused of putting lives at risk last night by vowing to block new strike laws. Well, I mean, Labour can't block them because the Conservatives, as far as we know, still have a majority.
Well, technically, yes.
Assuming that it gets through. I mean, the bigger thing is it's going to take months and months and months to get onto the statute book.
Yeah, I mean, there was a famous quote doing the rounds yesterday where Sunak says that strike laws won't do anything about strikes, which, in essence, in terms of the strikes we've now got, that is correct. I wouldn't, maybe that Mail front page makes Labour tread a little more cautiously than they might have done, but don't forget the Mail put Sabir Korma and his drinks during lockdown on the front for about 11 days straight, and that didn't seem to bother the Labour Party, so I doubt they're going to be deterred by that one. And
actually, one of the things we've seen, certainly in the sort of latter stages of last year, is increasing confidence from Keir Starmer. That actually, it was on private schools. They've got a debate on it this afternoon, I think, on Labour have got an opportunity debate on taxation of private schools. It was on the front of the Daily Mail sort of 2 or 3 days running, and actually he picked it up and used the attack to his advantage to attack Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, I mean, the way the world is now, Labour think they're going to win, the Tories think they're going to lose, and that changes the game a little bit. Gives Labour confidence. It makes different groups of Tories depressed and sad and wanting their leader to do something slightly different, whereas on the Labour benches there's generally a sort of benefit of the doubt for Starmer, allowing him to take the approach he wants to appeal to the public rather than being quite so prescriptive. So that's the world we're living in. Sunak's done an okay job of closing down the total chaos and psychodrama, but we're starting a year where the leader of the opposition is certainly on the front foot, and it'd be interesting to see today what he seeks to do with that.
Well, let's find out. We can now go live to the House of Commons. First PMQs of 2023. It's PMQs Unpacked. You can watch along on the YouTube channel. Let's go live to the House of Commons. It's Keir Starmer, question 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the 13 years of the last Labour government, there were no national NHS strikes. Yeah. If the Prime Minister had negotiated with the nurses before Christmas, they wouldn't be on strike. If he'd negotiated with the ambulance workers, they wouldn't be on strike either. So why is he choosing to prolong the misery rather than end these strikes?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear that we want to have constructive dialogue with the unions. That is also why, when it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies. But now the honourable gentleman simply doesn't have a policy when it comes to this question. If he wants, he talks about wanting to end the strikes. The question for him is simple then. Why does he not support our minimum safety legislation? We all know why. We all know why, Mr. Speaker. It's because he's on the side of his union paymasters, not patients.
Well, I should have said he would have said all that as well, because I could have scripted every word of that. And it's a perfectly legitimate argument. And we've now had, why didn't you talk to these people and, union paymasters? I hope Starmer's got something else up his sleeve, because if we're going to get that 6 times, it'll be a poor introduction to
I do wonder
an exciting
Keir
year.
Starmer's response to why voter support is because it's not going to end. It won't work. It's not going to end the strikes.
Yeah.
It makes no difference. The government wants it to happen. They've got a majority. They can get on the statute book, but it's going to take months. It's not going to do anything about the current strikes.
All true, but I mean, most what we would regard as pretty lefty countries in Europe have this kind of thing. The French have it, the Italians have it, the Spanish have it. It's completely non-weird.
Yeah, and actually, it already exists in some, or they'd already pre-announced it for some sectors, and what they're talking about is expanding it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the health service, there are often local agreements about levels of service, and this will just make it sort of national and fixed. So none of it's really that controversial. But as you rightly point out, it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference to what's currently going on.
And it's not actually going to stop strike. I mean, that's the key thing. I mean, it might mean that it's written into law that, a certain number of ambulance drivers have to be on duty or a certain number of trains have to run, but it's still going to be disruption and not the normal service.
Yeah, and this is all getting very heated. I mean, Rishi Sunak's got a big problem here, because would he like to pay nurses more? Of course he would. But he knows if he pays them too much more, you'll get inflation, and then there'll be more demands for even more. So they've got to strike a balance between acknowledging that these are groups of people who have seen their pay sort of in real terms eroded over a period of a decade, and in the midst of a cost of living crisis. Ultimately, they're going to have to pay them some more, and I've no doubt that's what they'll end up doing. The question is how much. But there's a bit of sort of performative politics around it as well. And Sunak also needs to look relatively tough on this stuff to his own party, because he's going to be spending all of 2023 looking over his shoulder, wondering whether, Boris Johnson or the ERG or the group of people who are trying to change the rules so the grassroots have more power, or the group of people who are the sort of the Trusketeers who have got their own group called whatever it is, Young Modern Conservatives or whatever it's called. There's more groups than you can shake a stick at trying to cause problems for Rishi Sunak, and all of them want to see him play this in a relatively tough way. It's more D chess than it used to be. There's 4 or 5 Ds in the Chorley party, and that's before you consider the public and the electorate and what his own grassroots members think. And it's at the end of the day, he's got a massive problem, and I think most of the country would like him to get on and resolve it. Yeah.
Well, there's also, I suppose, that tension in Conservative ranks. On the one hand, politically, they think just get this thing resolved, but ideologically, they want to destroy the unions, and that tension is always there. So let's go back to the House of Commons then. Let's see where this goes next. Question 2 for Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when I clapped nurses, I meant it. His response to the greatest crisis in the history of the NHS is to threaten to sack our nurses. His Transport Secretary says it's not the solution. His Education Secretary hopes it won't apply in schools. His own assessments say it could increase the number of strikes. The simple truth is you can't legislate your way out of 13 years of failure. Between 2010 and 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID, Prime Minister, the number of people stuck on the NHS waiting list doubled. Why do patients always wait longer under the Tories?
Whoa. This is the new year. I want to start off with the refreshed chamber, but certainly not by interruption. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the minimum safety legislation. Let's just talk about it a little bit further, because this is a simple proposition that no one denies the union's freedom to strike, but it is also important to balance that with people's right to have access to life-saving healthcare at the same time. Mr. Speaker, this shouldn't be controversial. The International Labour Organization supports minimum service levels. They're present in France, in Italy, in Spain. Normally, he's in favour of more European alignment, Mr. Speaker. Why not now?
Oh, you're right in the lines for both sides today, Tim. Exactly a point that you were making.
That was a decent exchange, I thought. I mean, I agree with what you said at the start. Starmer just sounds more confident, doesn't he? He's got some good script writers. When I clap the nurses, I meant it. He sounds a bit angry. It's delivered with a bit of punch. And he just seems much more comfortable having a pop at Sunak than he ever really did at Boris Johnson. He never, it's obviously like nailing bombs to a wall trying to have a go at Boris Johnson. But
there was always, I don't know, but there was always that sort of slight thing with Boris Johnson that if you poked him too much, he might unleash, like basically taking the mick on you. And so if you keep it in the parameters of sort of Commons debate, then you could get away with it. But maybe there's less fear that Rishi Sunak's got. Rishi Sunak unleashing the full forces of his wit and wisdom possibly is slightly less intimidating.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, Sunak's response, and if you're a Tory MP, was not bad. A bit of research there, have a pop at the International Labour Organisation. You cite them as evidence of what you're saying. And the joke about European alignment is okay.
Well, it got me through to the end without actually saying anything.
Exactly, and that's fine. But as you say, there was no Captain Hindsight or any of that, or what Boris Johnson came up with last night at his
the Carlton Club,
his
Carlton unveiling,
where he referred to Keir Starmer as Sir Crasharoony Snooze Fest. Now, I'm not sure that's Johnson's finest work, but it is indicative of a genre which we no longer have at Prime Minister's Question.
We sadly miss. Just having a look at the YouTube comments. John has said, "Just answer the question, Sunak." To which someone's replied, "Are you new here, John?"
Yes. Well, I'm glad that somebody responded on my behalf there.
Very good. Right, let's go back to House of Commons. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, they've gone from clapping the nurses to sacking the nurses. It's that simple. And to add insult to injury, they're the cause of the crisis. His government commissioned a report on waiting times. He knows this. His own report says this is not a COVID problem, it's 10 years of managed decline. As a result, 7.2 million people are now waiting for treatment. He says he wants to be held to account over that. So let's be very clear. Is his promise merely to get those numbers back to where they were before COVID, that's 4.6 million, or back to where Labour had them in 2010, almost half of that? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, again, let's just start with the facts. The honourable gentleman seems to completely ignore the fact that not just in England, but in Scotland and in Wales and in many other European countries, COVID has had an extraordinary impact on health services. Now we have a very clear plan to bring the waiting list down, and it's one that the NHS supports. But I tell you what the NHS doesn't need. What they don't need is Labour's idea. What they don't need is Labour's only idea, which is for another completely disruptive, top-down, unfunded reorganisation buying out every single GP contract. Now, these aren't my words, Mr. Speaker. The CEO of the Nuffield Trust said it will cost a fortune and it's out of date, just like the Labour Party.
So that's a reference there to Wes Streeting in an interview with The Times on Saturday, saying of the many things he wanted to do, ban smoking for everyone and much else besides. You can self-refer, going to dermatologist if you want to. One of the big ideas he floated was tearing up the way that GPs are employed. So they'd all be on NHS staff, whereas at the moment they're essentially self-employed, running their own businesses, which we've talked a lot about on the show this week. I suppose that's the risk if you start actually putting big ideas out there. Your opponents will use it as a stick to beat you with.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of people blame that GP contract that goes back, 20 odd years for being the root of some of these problems. But equally, big reorganisations in the NHS cost lots of money and are hugely disruptive. It is curious that so much has been put in and so little has got out. But that's sort of the way of the world at the moment. And again, I think, Starmer asked a question there about what's the waiting list target. Didn't get an answer on that, so we still don't know. The question Sunak might ask Starmer is, look, we poured billions and billions and billions extra in. How much more are you going to put in if you're going to solve this? And we don't have an answer to that question either yet.
But I suppose if you ask that question, you have to admit that
there isn't enough.
You've poured loads of money in, and it's still a mess. So maybe you put it in the wrong place, or was
The one thing where I think Sunak's on stronger ground is this idea that it's Starmer saying it's nothing to do with COVID. I think the public kind of gets that a lot of people missed a lot of operations and a lot of elective surgery and a lot of treatment during COVID, and that we're now having to catch up with that. So while it's certainly the case that Labour needs to make the point that there has been, relatively speaking, a period of less funding under this Conservative government, I think if he labours that point too much, the public will sort of think that's not quite right, actually, mate.
And it was interesting. We were talking about this excess death story. We spoke to David Spiegelhalter from Cambridge University earlier, and he said that excess deaths are high in lots of sort of European countries. This is not a uniquely British thing, and clearly COVID is one of the common factors across all those countries. Right, let's go. Question number 4. It's PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. You can watch along on YouTube. Let's go back to the comments.
Mr. Speaker, so he can't tell us how much he'll reduce waiting lists by or when. So much for accountability that he wants. As ever with this Prime Minister, you scratch the surface and you find there is nothing there. Last month, 1.4 million people waited more than 4 weeks for a GP appointment. When Labour left government, you were guaranteed an appointment in 2 days. When does the Prime Minister expect to get back to that?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to waiting lists, we've already eliminated 2-year wait lists done last year. We're on track. We're on track this spring to eliminate those waiting 18 months, with a clear plan to go further, to eliminate those waiting 52 weeks by next spring. And we're doing that with record funding, more community diagnostic centres, more surgical hubs and more patient choice. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I've made tackling wait lists one of my 5 priorities. But what are his? They seem to change every single week. Right? That first, he was against NHS outsourcing. Now, he's apparently in favour of it. He's inconsistent, unprincipled, and in hock to his union.
This is Lindsay Hoyle.
Order.
Not happening.
Can I just remind the Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions, not opposition questions. Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Well, that cut right across his peroration didn't it? Inconsistent, unprincipled, and in hock to his union. Paymasters, I'm predicting.
I think he's going to have to do that again for the benefit of the social media clip later.
I suspect we'll hear that little trifecta in his final answer.
I'm not sure it's the best boast in the world that we've got rid of the mere 2-year waits.
It was 2 days when Labour were there, and now it's, well, we've done away with 2 years. We're about to do away with 18 months. We promised to do away with a year. Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah. And the GP thing, we talked about GPs actually on the show on Monday and Tuesday. Every time we do it, we get inundated with people saying what a nightmare it is, they can't get appointments. And then GPs say it's a nightmare, we're trying to do our best. Royal College of GPs said that the number of appointments is up by nearly a fifth. In part because they've got nowhere else to go. People are, all turning to their GPs as the sort of first port of call. This is a proper sort of retail thing. If the Labour Party go into the next election promising you'll get an appointment in 2 days, that's a proper retail offer that will resonate.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a lot of people I know who'd vote for that.
Yeah. That alone.
There might even be 2 of them in this studio.
Well, let's see if the Rishi Sunak's use of GPs or otherwise comes up again as we go back to the House of Commons. It's question number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the Prime Minister saying he's now registered with an NHS doctor, so he'll soon enjoy the experience of waiting on hold every morning at 8 a.m. to get a GP appointment. But I can tell him that those that are waiting now don't want another round of empty promises or boasting about what he's done. They just want to know when they'll be able to see a doctor. And this is not just about routine care. There could be nothing more terrifying than being told you might have cancer. That's why the last Labour government brought in a guarantee you'd been seen by a specialist within 2 weeks. Today, 50,000 people are waiting longer than that. 50,000. And everyone in this House will appreciate the anxiety that they're feeling. So when will cancer patients once again get the certainty of quick care that they got under Labour?
Mr. Speaker, why is there a challenge with cancer times right now? I tell you, again, it's just... I just absolutely no understanding of the situation, Mr. Speaker. What happened to cancer referrals during COVID? They went down by almost 2/3, Mr. Speaker. That was because of a pandemic that they went down. And by the way, if we had stayed and listened to him, we'd still be in lockdown and there'd be a bit more waiting lists, right, Mr. Speaker? But actually, right now, there are record levels of cancer treatment as we catch up with those missed things. But he talks about what's terrifying, Mr. Speaker. What's terrifying is right now. What's terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and Canada and the US, they ban strikes on blue light services. We're not doing that. All we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care. Why is he against that, Mr. Speaker?
So, I'm not sure we're making a lot of progress, Tim Shipman.
No, but I think it's a good, robust day of exchanges. And I'm, listen to the noise. I think MPs on both sides are relatively content. Starmer talking about Sunak now registering with an NHS doctor and waiting.
So we
on
should
hold.
explain that's that was before Keir Starmer. He was asked about his arrangements with his doctor, which he said. I think at the weekend he wouldn't answer the question, would he, Rishi Sunak?
No.
And he's now said that he's registered with an NHS doctor, but has used private healthcare in the past.
Yes.
Which is what...
Well, I suspect what happens is that if he really needs it, he phones his NHS doctor, sits on hold, is told he can have an appointment in a fortnight, and then promptly phones his private doctor. And there are lots
it's
of
possible.
these services
Most normal
now.
people would be registered with a GP, even if you have got private health. I wouldn't know because I haven't done it, but... There's nothing to stop you doing.
Comment.
There's nothing to do you, but have you doing both?
No, and then Sunak.
In fact, I think we can now hear. This is Rishi Sunak in his own words.
There are no NHS dentists taking on patients in Lancaster and Fleetwood, and for those constituents of mine lucky enough to have one, they're waiting months for an appointment. So can I ask the Prime Minister how long he had to wait for his last NHS dentist appointment?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the new reformed NHS dentistry contract, there are now more NHS dentists across the UK with more funding, making sure people can get the treatment they need. But, Mr. Speaker, let me answer the lady directly. I am registered with an NHS GP. I have used independent healthcare in the past. I'll answer her question. I am registered with NHS GP. I have used independent healthcare in the past, and I'm also grateful to the Friarage Hospital for the fantastic care they've given my family over the years. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to come from an NHS family, and that's why I'm passionately committed to protecting it with more funding, more doctors and nurses, and a clear plan to cut the waiting list.
Independent healthcare.
Very important. That
yes,
like
always good.
Schools.
Always good to use that word rather than private.
Rather than private. Yeah.
And what we didn't talk about because fire and brimstone. Sunak, in the last answer to Starmer, did talk about how we'd still be in lockdown if it had been down to him. So those of you with bells at home or compiling greatest hits or bingo cards of, Boris Johnson legacy arguments would have been having a
still in lockdown now as a particular favourite, and a little bit of EU. We haven't quite been in the European Medicines Agency, but there was a touch of that with the European alignment. Right, now we're going to jump back again. So we have now got the final exchange. Stand by your social media outlets. This is the final exchange there between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. That's question number 6.
There's not a minimum level of service any day because they've broken the NHS. And he's not promising that people would get to see a doctor in a few days like they did under Labour. He's not promising that cancer patients would get urgent treatment as they did under Labour. He's not even promising an NHS that puts patients first like it did under Labour. No, he's promising that one day, although we can't say when, their record high waiting list will stop growing. And that's it. After 13 years in government, what does it say? That the best they can offer is that at some point they might stop making things worse.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the NHS, it's crystal clear. The Conservatives on the side of patients, Labour on the side of their union paymasters. Mr. Speaker, I've laid out my priorities for the country. Waiting list down, inflation down, debt down, growth up, and the boat's stopped, Mr. Speaker. All he does is flip from one thing to another, and that's the difference between him and me. He's focused on petty politics. I'm delivering for Britain.
Well, I think we should probably discuss the why it's still something of a novelty to have a leader of the Labour Party boasting about what happened
about the Labour
under
Party.
Labour.
Yeah,
like it, you could get a GP appointment like you could under Labour. Well, you can't get a cancer treatment like under Labour. That's quite something. That Keir Starmer is now 12 years, almost 13 years after Labour left office.
Tony Blair will be doing whatever the opposite of spinning in his grave is. Because don't forget, when Gordon Brown came in, he wasn't too fond of saying what Tony Blair had done well. And then Ed Miliband became Labour leader and had almost an aneurysm about mentioning anything that had ever gone before. And then Jeremy Corbyn, of course, basically hated most of what had gone before. And was certainly shy of ever praising the previous Labour government. None of the previous Labour governments had ever gone far enough for him. So, yes, it is novel, and it was a nice sort of little riff, He used it 3 or 4 times, and that will be cheering for his own benches. But, give Sunak his due. It was a pretty rambunctious response, and, it set out what he's trying to achieve. It set out what he announced in his big speech. He's got these 5 priorities. This bloke on the other side is carping and moaning, and I'm here to deliver. And that really is the only argument Rishi Sunak's got. And the main task he's got this year is to buy enough time for some of that stuff to happen.
Yeah. Because this time next year, he can't have the same lines.
No, he can't have the same lines. What he hopes is that he's able to say, I delivered on all 5 of the things I told you last January, and now here's some more things.
Yeah.
And I'm going to deliver on those as well. And I've got a track record. Don't change horses midstream. We had all these other exciting Tory leaders, but they didn't get on and do it, and I'm getting on and doing it. And that will be his argument. And so PMQs this year is going to be a series of holding Sunak to account for those 5 pledges, or saying that the 5 pledges are meaningless and not enough. But, he hopes if he can show some delivery that he's got half a chance.
It's an interesting, but lots of comments on exactly this on the YouTube channel. John says the electoral resonance of Sunak's speech will be proportionate to how well people feel he's delivered for them. Not, I suspect, much. What precisely is he delivering, says Graham. He's delivering, and then there's 4 asterisks from another John. And I suppose that's the big question, isn't it? He's still in the early days at the moment. But if your thing is I'm getting on and delivering, you've got to show some progress on that. One other final thought, Tim, because I know you're a fan of sitting through focus groups as I do. I think it was question 4 from Keir Starmer. He used the phrase "scratch the surface," and you soon see that there's nothing there. That feels like the sort of thing which comes out of a focus. We've seen a little bit of that from some of the ones that we've done.
I mean, it used to be the sort of thing that came out of focus groups about Keir Starmer, ironically. And if that's now percolating about Sunak, I must confess, have heard that.
But that sort of sense of it's all a bit thin, he's a bit showbiz, he's a bit PR, the glossy party political broadcasts are being released tonight, all sort of feeds into that. And I just wonder whether Labour sort of trying out some of those lines.
Yeah, I think they probably are trying it out. I mean, if you'd asked me what you find under the surface if you lifted the lid off Rishi Sunak, probably a sort of very, very high-powered computer beavering away.
Yes,
in a not very exciting way, but doing a lot of sums.
Doing a lot of sums.
Rather than sort of completely vacuous and empty. But, if that does start to catch on, then... it's interesting for Sunak because he's both of those things. He has tried to play the sort of glib appearance card, and pretty well anybody who knows him knows that he's also a sort of mind-numbing details man as well. So, but being a details man is not sexy politically, only if it becomes delivery. And the other challenge he's got, he can turn around at the end of the year, he will hope and say, I've delivered on these 5 promises. But I think the bigger picture that Labour need to exploit is that how much will that make people feel their lives are changing? Now, some people who follow politics might think, oh, well, that's a clever bit of politics that he's now achieved that. But, are bills coming down? Are people beginning to feel a bit more secure?
That's the key thing. Is his promises are very like, let's get back to square one.
Yeah.
Let's stop the boats coming.
Yeah.
Let's get inflation back to something a bit more manageable. It's not your life is going to be better. Your life is going to be not as worse as it was.
Yeah, I think there's an esoteric point that's useful is, people want also to think that their government is competent and getting on with things. And I think it's fair to say that for some time they haven't felt that, certainly for a year or more, and some of them for longer than that. But, all the distractions in the Conservative Party made it look like they, were barely able to tie their own shoelaces each morning. If Sunak, I think, has already shown enough to convince people that there's at least someone getting on with things. And if he looks like he's beginning to make some progress, that will have some kind of effect on people. But, I think what a lot of people want to see is changes to their own lives rather than just the sort of sense that the government isn't making everything worse all the time. And that's kind of the point Starmer was making at the end. At the moment, what he's... At some point in the indeterminate future, we promise to stop making things worse, and that's
put that on a bus.
It's a difficult argument to sort of make pithily and fun, but I would give them both reasonably high marks for that exchange.
That's interesting, actually. Well, in fact, join the news. Give them both a mark out of 10 on the YouTube channel, and we'll pick through and see what you think. Mark out of 10 for Rishi Sunak and for Keir Starmer. We'll do the best of the rest in just a sec. Some of the backbench questions after we get the latest news from Mike Powell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
The Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen has been suspended from the party following tweets about the number of excess deaths following the COVID vaccine rollout. The man who heads up disciplinary issues for the Tories, Simon Hart, says the MP for North West Leicestershire crossed a line. There will now be an investigation. Trade unions have told a group of MPs they'll continue strike action for as long as it takes to get a fair pay deal. Mick Whelan, the boss of ASLEF, told the Transport Committee the chance of a resolution was zero, adding, "We're further away than when we started." 14 health unions have jointly decided they won't participate with the NHS pay review body, which recommends future salary rises. They're demanding talks with ministers about their current industrial dispute first. Ambulance workers across England and Wales are on strike today, as are secondary school teachers in Scotland. At Prime Minister's questions in the last half hour, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has asked why Rishi Sunak is, in his words, prolonging the misery rather than ending strikes by negotiating.
If the Prime Minister had negotiated with the nurses before Christmas, they wouldn't be on strike. If he'd negotiated with the ambulance workers, they wouldn't be on strike either. So why is he choosing to prolong the misery rather than end these strikes?
This was the Prime Minister's response.
Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear that we want to have constructive dialogue with the unions. That is also why, when it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies.
In response to a question from Labour's Kat Smith about NHS dental care, in which she asked the Prime Minister how long he had to wait for an NHS appointment, Rishi Sunak admitted he has used private healthcare in the past. In weekend interviews, he refused to say whether he had used a private doctor. Counter-terror police say they'll follow every avenue to find out the origin of a package contaminated with uranium which was seized at Heathrow Airport. Experts say it posed no threat to the public. Today's weather, many areas dry with some sunshine and lighter winds, offsetting somewhat lower temperatures. However, some showers in some exposed western and possibly far southeastern parts. More widespread and heavier in the western northwest Scotland this afternoon, and highs ranging between a cool 4 Celsius in northwest Scotland to a milder 11 in southwest England. Now let's get some sport with Kane Reeves.
The treatment of pregnant players by women's Super League teams has been criticised by Reading captain Emma McCandy. The Scotland international says the new 14-week full-pay maternity leave in the WSL doesn't go far enough. McCandy, who gave birth in 2021 before the changes came in, told the Off the Ball COY Gig podcast that women's players need more time to recover due to the demands on their body in the professional game.
There's not really like any research on it, especially for like footballers, because I think they've done like a lot of stuff on like running and just like getting back running, but obviously we've got as contact, then trying to kick a ball at the same time when you've got really weak like pelvic floor and stuff, you basically just pee yourself, girls, not going to lie. I then had to then fake an injury because I didn't want to tell people that I was pregnant until the 12-week scan in case it didn't go down well. Then obviously you're a bit like, well, they can't sack you because you could basically sue them.
Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola says he's had some ridiculous thoughts ahead of this weekend's Manchester derby against United. His side are at Southampton in the EFL Cup quarter-finals tonight, live with our colleagues on Talk Sport, before heading to Old Trafford in the Premier League on Saturday. Guardiola has been criticised in the past for overthinking his tactical game, but he insists there's a method to his latest plans.
Winning a lot of titles in the last 6 years, because we won a lot, and especially the important ones as the Premier League 2 times back-to-backs. Still in this competition, we are there. This is the biggest detail that the club is doing things correctly.
British tennis number 1 Cam Norrie has continued his unbeaten start to 2023 by reaching the quarter-finals of the Auckland Open. He claimed a 3-set victory over Yearly Lehechka. Jack Draper is through to the last 8 at the Adelaide International 2 after beating American Tommy Paul in straight sets. He'll face Karen Khachanov next. And Andy Murray, he also progressed in the Kooyong Classic in Melbourne ahead of next week's Australian Open. You can read more on these stories by visiting the Times website and app.
Apply. On digital radio, on the web, and via the Times Radio app. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
A very good afternoon to you. We've done PMQs Unpacked, Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak. I asked you to score them out of 10 on the YouTube channel. 4 out of 10 for Sunak, says Matt. 8 out of 10 for Starmer. Andy says 5 out of 10 for Sunak, 7 out of 10 for Starmer, 2 for Sunak, says Madge, 8 for Starmer. And then John and Robert have given exactly the same score in the same format. 3 out of 10 for Sunak, 7 out of 10 for Starmer. Generally, 7s and 8s for Starmer, basically. 3s and 4s for Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak's repeated lines are unbelievable, says Luke, given that Starmer is often attacked for not being union-friendly enough. But that is a good point, isn't it, I suppose, Tim Shipman, who's still here. I'm not sure the unions think that Keir Starmer's in their pocket.
No, that's certainly true. I was pondering between a 7 and 8 for Starmer. I'd give Sunak a bit more. I think some of the listeners are underestimating what PMQs is all about in terms of him shoring up his support with his own party. They seem pretty happy with his performance. He made the points he wanted to make, and I think that puts him, in the 6 range, personally. And
somebody's asking about... we don't need to get involved in that. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. The best of the rest now. We'll kick off with the newish leader of the SNP in Westminster, is Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, if he wants to talk about the fact that Scotland is energy rich but fuel poor on Westminster's watch, I am more than happy to do so. But for today, let's reflect upon numbers, and in particular those numbers which were shone a light on by Sam Coates of Sky. In particular, those in relation to the Prime Minister's favourite potential successor, which showed that over the course of 4 months, from 4 speeches, he raked in excess of £1 million Does the Prime Minister not find it utterly perverse that senior members of the Conservative Party are feathering their nest in this way, whilst at the same time seeking to deny working people the opportunity to strike for fair pay?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we need to talk about our predecessors, but I remember.
It's a reference to Ian Blackford, who was actually bumped off by Stephen Flynn.
I think it was one of his predecessors that did indeed work for Russia Today, if I'm not mistaken.
That's Alex Salmond.
But what I would say is he talks about the priorities. You know, yesterday the SNP spent time talking yet more about independence at a time when we should be talking about delivering for people across the United Kingdom, focusing on their jobs, improving the NHS across the UK, in Scotland as in everywhere else. That's the kind of thing I want to talk to the Scottish Government about, and I hope that he'll work with me to do that.
I think Stephen Flynn might have got his predecessors and successors muddled up
about
there.
his successor. I was thinking, well, who does Rishi Sunak
Who is
want to be
Rishi
his
Sunak's favoured successor?
Yeah.
It's obviously Boris Johnson in his £1 million extra earnings from speeches as a result. Well, I think we did actually know all of that.
Well, indeed, and then Flynn talked about, stopping people from striking for fair pay. I mean, I was slightly surprised Sunak didn't make the point that the legislation doesn't stop anybody striking for fair pay. It merely sets up minimum service levels that they leave behind.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a huge amount to unpick from that.
I think next.
Let's go. Next, an absolute treat for us all. Still with us before he goes off and becomes a permanent celebrity. In the House of Commons, it's Matt Hancock.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the disgusting anti-Semitic, anti-vax conspiracy theories that have been promulgated online this morning are not only deeply offensive, but anti-scientific and have no place in this House or in our wider society?
Prime Minister. Well, can I join with my right honourable friend in completely condemning those types of comments that we saw this morning in the strongest possible terms? Obviously, it is utterly unacceptable to make linkages and use language like that, and I'm determined that the scourge of anti-Semitism is eradicated. It has absolutely no place in our society, and I know that the previous few years have been challenging for the Jewish community, and I never want them to experience anything like that ever again.
Final question.
So this is obviously all in reference to Andrew Bridgen, who during the course of the show today, I mean, I thought his biggest problem at the beginning of the show was he'd been tweeting about me, but then he decided to tweet linking to a conspiracy theorist website. As one consultant cardiologist said to me, this is referring to the rollout of the COVID vaccine. This is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. Not long afterwards, the Conservative Chief Whip withdrew the whip from Andrew Bridgen, so he's now suspended from the House of Commons for 5 days for breaking lobbying rules. He's now suspended as a Conservative, but he obviously remains an MP. There's something interesting about this. I mean, it's interesting that Matt Hancock sort of raised it at the Commons, Tim. It's interesting that it's the reference to the Holocaust, which they've decided is the reason to take action against him. Not
Rather
the fact
than the cranky anti-vax stuff.
Very, very cranky anti-vax stuff, talking about it being the work of the secret services. He used a House of Commons debate before Christmas.
Yes, he did.
To make some completely unfounded claims about the vaccines not being safe. It's sort of interesting. The question isn't the fact that why did they suspend him today? For me, anyway, it's why didn't they do something sooner?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. There are some things that are easier to condemn than others, and anti-Semitism is a clean own goal for the Tories to, Bridgen, is one of those eccentric characters. Quite good political judgment in some ways on things. He's got a feel for his constituency. He gives good quote. So he's one of those people who's always been around, but feels disgruntled, has never been made a minister, looks for a cause. He found it in Brexit. He's now found it in anti-vaxxery. And he's one of those people who takes things to the nth degree and, as far as a lot of his colleagues are concerned, goes far too far. And is constantly convinced that everybody's got it in for him and that everybody's got it in for people who think like him. And so it's very easy to see how someone with that kind of mentality would find this kind of issue attractive. Now, it's legitimate to raise questions about the vaccine, but as you rightly point out, and Andrew Percy did earlier, most of what he's saying is complete crankery. But it's easier to say that's anti-Semitic than it is to say this is completely off beam. And Hancock's a former health secretary, and he wanted to make an issue of it.
And I suppose the other thing is that if you start getting into the vaccine thing with him, you end up having a war of words about facts and figures.
And you're disappearing down a rabbit hole.
You end up giving it legitimacy. There's even a debate when most people would say there isn't.
And the interesting thing there, I mean, just on the specifics, I mean, Hancock's wording was very much, I don't think this bloke should be an MP anymore, let alone a member of the Conservative Party. And we're at the point where he's had the whip suspended. Sunak didn't say that he should be kicked out as an MP, deselected, or put in a position where he has to.
No place in this house or wider society is what I'm
and the PM did not quite embrace all of that. For the very good reason, I suspect that would create problems, and some Brexiteers would find a reason to have a grievance on Bridgen's behalf, and it would create more internal tensions. But Bridgen is a maverick, and he's gone too far this time.
And he's quiet. Hard to see how he comes back. Suspended from the House of Commons for breaking lobbying rules. Now suspended for being anti-Semitic and a crank. At what point does Rishi Sunak think this is the week to bring him back into the fold?
It's hard to see that he would. The interesting thing would be, what does Bridgen's constituency party think about it up in North West Leicestershire?
Yes, and what do all the potatoes think? Really good to see you, Tim Shipman, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times. You obviously read Tim in the paper at the weekend. We'll do the quiz next. We're also going to have a look at party political broadcast, because of this slightly peculiar little thing that Rishi Sunak's got going on tonight. We'll do that next on Times Radio.
Kathy Newman at Drive, Friday afternoon from 4 on Times Radio.
Join me at 4 on Drive for news, views and some gloriously quirky stories.
Alongside a world-class lineup of guests, experts and contributors.
The Bank of England will have to raise interest rates much faster than they would have expected to do.
Telling the stories that matter.
Is it the job of government to be fair, or doesn't that matter anymore?
Kathy Newman at Drive, Friday afternoon from 4 on Times Radio. Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
Very good afternoon to you, Matt Chorley on Times Radio. Now, we'll do the quiz in just a moment, but we've been talking about party political broadcast because Rishi Sunak has got one, I think it's out tonight, which he's now rebadged as an address to the nation. They've been around for a long time, though. Do they actually work? Are they any good? Let's speak to David Cowling. He's a senior visiting research fellow at King's College London. Hi, David.
Hi.
Explain a little bit of the history of party political broadcasts. How do they sort of come about?
Well, they started in radio in 1924.
Oh, so they've been around a long time.
Pleased to know they lasted 20 minutes. You'd never be able to get that part of your life back again, would you? And then television broadcasts followed in the early 1950s, and they've initially lasted about 15 minutes. And they've developed, obviously. The production editorial control of the broadcast material rests entirely with the parties themselves. They deliver the broadcasts to the broadcasters, and they're then sort of distributed. And we have them during elections, of course, but then we also have them during the year. And the official and unofficial group of broadcasters chivvy up what the allocation should be. So many to Labour, so many to Conservative, so many to Lib Dems and the rest.
And how have they changed in style? When there were 20 minutes on the radio, were they literally just sort of monologues from party leaders? At what point did they sort of become sort of full-blown productions?
Well, for quite a while, it was talking heads. And certainly you'd have rather elderly, distinguished, grey-haired politicians talking to the nation face-to-face about the party and its policies and the rest. But then 1979 came along, and the ad men elbowed the politicians out of the driving seat, and we had Saatchi and Saatchi for the Conservatives, and a whole raft of advertising techniques came in, and also people drew upon the US experience. And then Hollywood came to town. So in 1987, Hugh Hudson did a big Labour Party broadcast dubbed Kinnock the Movie.
Ah, yeah, of course.
Didn't talk about specific policies, but talked about Kinnock as a family man, and had quite an impact because there was a 16-point increase in the election campaign in the polls for Kinnock as an effective leader. And then the Conservatives bit back in 1992, had John Schlesinger director of Billy Liar and Midnight Cowboy, who made what was dubbed the John Major, the movie, where you saw John Major roaming around his old haunting grounds of Brixton, looking through the car window and pointing out his old home and the rest.
And do you think they still have the same impact? You're talking about, 1980s, 1990s. These days, we get videos from party leaders almost every day posted on social media. So it's not quite the same sort of, I don't know. I'm not sure the nation's ever, gathered around their televisions thinking, oh, lovely, we've got a party political broadcast. But does it have the same impact, the sort of 3-minute, 5-minute hit on BBC One that it might have done?
I don't think so, for the very reason you identified, because 30 or 40 years ago, we were much more monolithic. If there was a broadcast, then there were very few areas of alternatives that people could go to, and people were much more engaged. Now politics is far less tribal, it's more transactional, and you've got people who are much more accustomed, as you rightly say, to getting bits and pieces from a whole raft of alternatives. So I don't think they are as important, but what they do continue to do, I think, is to move away from the earlier basis based in Parliament, the parliamentary system, and to become more presidential. Hence, Rishi Sunak is launching, it seems to me, most likely, not a great exposition of Conservative policy, but it's his attempt to present himself as an individual, as a human being, rather than as a fierce politician wrestling with, major problems.
And why have we got one now? It's not, I understand sort of during general election campaigns, making sure that everyone has a chance to sort of set out their stall and reach everyone who's sort of watching television. But why are we having them? I know Labour Party, Keir Starmer's got one tomorrow. Why do we have them in the sort of second week of January?
Well, because it's our pact with the devil. We have these because in this country we don't allow party political broadcasting to be done commercially.
Can't buy adverts, in the way that you get.
So I think part of the deal is certainly the election broadcast, which we're most familiar with, but during the year you have these opportunities for the parties, and clearly he's commandeered one to present sort of, I suppose, his equivalent of Rishi Sunak the movie.